Alright, so I thought it would be a good time to knock another project off the list. And I like this one because it's a really short one. It's kind of like a weekend project, and it's not even going to take your whole weekend. So behind me you'll see my fireplace. There's things I like about it and things I don't like about it. But overall I just think it needs a little mini makeover. So particularly the mantle. So it's oak. It's an oak box. I think these are solid oak corbels on it. You know, they've been up there for 20 plus years, so they've yellowed out a bit. Just kind of needs an update. There's some stains on the top, but other than that, it's in pretty good shape. It just needs an update. Now, when I was trying to decide what I wanted to do with the fireplace, I had a lot of different ideas go through my head. I'm the type of person that's like, let's start from scratch or start fresh, and let's just rip it all out and start over. So new tile, new mantle, that kind of stuff, and just redo the whole thing. But then there's the cheap or frugal side of me where it's like, I think I can do this and make it look a lot nicer on a budget or without spending a lot of money and still have a nice outcome. So that's kind of what I want to do with this, and that's kind of what my whole channel is about, is if you can do it yourself, you can save yourself a lot of money, and there's probably a better or more affordable way to do almost everything to where you get a similar output with less effort and less money put into it. So with that in mind, I think the focus is the mantle. So I do like rustic stuff. I do like the industrial look. I like wood, stone, metal, glass, that kind of stuff. I had thought about doing reclaimed timber or something up here. If you looked at prices on that stuff, I looked at something similar size to this that was reclaimed from a barn. It was like $400 just for this alone. And then you have to figure out what you're going to do here when you pull the corbels out, because if you keep the stone, now you've got these gaps that you've got to deal with. Good luck trying to match the stone, so I'm like, well, I've got to put some kind of corbel in there. So that was another issue. So I found a solution to that. I was going to make some, but I found these corbels locally in like a discount store and stuff. So I actually got a set of these to replace these corbels for 40 bucks, which was a pretty good deal. They're solid, almost quarter inch steel. I was going to make something similar to it, but for the price and everything, I think they'll do well and less effort on my part. So hence again, a weekend project. So I've got that figured out. I don't mind the stone. This is actually the same stone that's on the skirt of my my home. So the front lower portion of the home is the same stone. So it kind of ties in when you walk in the front door. It's kind of one of the first things you see at the back of the house. So I don't mind this. So that's staying. There's some cracks in the grout between the slabs for the hearth. I'm probably going to deal with those when I deal with the floor, because I'm planning on ripping up the carpet and extending the hardwoods into here. And the idea I had when I was extending the hardwoods in here, I was going to change the color as well. And there's a color I use on some other projects. It's kind of a antiqued, weathered gray. So I think that's what I'm going to do with this. So this weekend's project, we're going to pull the mantle off, pull the corbels off, strip this down, change the color, and reinstall it with the new corbels. So that's, if you look at the whole project, less than 100 bucks. I have a lot of the finishes and all that kind of stuff already, but if you were to buy it, I mean, $40 in corbels, finishes and stuff, you had to buy a can of each thing, you're into it less than $100, and easily be able to take care of it in a weekend. So that's the project for today, so let's get started. Okay, so I monkeyed around with the two pins that are holding this whole thing on there. I thought they were Phillips head screws. They ended up being square head screws, so a little bit of digging with a pick and getting in there, getting all the debris out of the hole first. My Phillips was slipping on, you know, this doesn't seem right, so a little more digging and looking up close with my horrible eyesight, I was able to figure out they were square, so I got them started. So let's get the rest of them out, and I think this whole mantle will come right off, so let's see how that works. They were also at an angle and not straight down, so that threw me off a bit too. So I was digging in the hole to try to get to them. That threw me off. that should be it, the 2 screws. I didn't see any more. Wish me luck. Oh, yep. Here we go. How hideous does that look? Yeah, we're going to cover all that all back up with a better looking one of these. So. Let's just take this out to the shop and then we'll disassemble this and see what we have to do to. They might have glued it and put a bunch of tacks in it. We'll see. We'll deconstruct it out in the shed. They're out in the shop. Okay, so we got the mantle in the shop. I need to pull the corbels off, and I took a look at it a little bit. I think what they did was they just glued them on, so face glued them, and I see some pin nails in the back, so they just held that in place. And then I took a couple notes, because when I pulled it off, I noticed that this corbel is actually set in a little bit, and I think that's because they had some stonework or some mud and stuff behind it that was sticking out, so they just modified the corbel rather than removing the mud and making it flat against the wall. So this one sticks in about, ½ inch or so. This one's flush. So I made some notes about that, so when I reinstall corbels, and I'm gonna make a little spacer here so that my corbels don't recess into the wall behind all the stonework. So I'm gonna make some spacers out of these and paint them black, so hopefully the shadow and stuff will just disappear. And that brings my new metal corbels, which are thinner, more prominently out. So made some notes about that, distance in. More than likely, I'll pull these off, clean up the mantle, refinish it and stuff, hang it, and then I'll go back and do the corbels after the fact, because they're not actually holding this up. They're holding some weight against the wall, but those 2 screws in the ledger board is what's holding this up. And this is just an empty box. So you can see there's no end grain. It's just a box they made out of oak and then clear coated it. So see all the way up? Let's do a little updating, change the color out, that kind of stuff, and hopefully pretty it up, and I'll be a little happier when I'm staring at my TV and look down. I can say, it's a nice mantle, instead of, it's a yellow mantle. So I'm hoping just to pop this off. Hopefully it's not super glued on there, but they didn't do a very good job with the wood glue, but we will see. I got a bunch of hammers, so let's get whacking. I do need to save down here, so I'm not going to whack it too far there, because I just want to shave those off for spacers, so we will see. That was way easier than I thought. That looks like a couple pin nails in the front and then a bunch of them in the back, so I'll have to try to pull those out before I sand. But that went way smoother than it could have, so I'm happy about that. That was a 2-whacker. Still good. Well, that's good. You don't have to watch me use 500 different hammers, so, which I have. Okay, so I'm going to pull the staples out. That's tedious. You don't need to watch me do that, and then we'll get the sanding. So. Okay, just wanted to show you real quick. The pin nails actually came out really well. There's a row here, and then there was one on each side just to hold it while the glue set. And luckily for me, I mean, it's holding the corbels on, but they came off pretty easy. So I'm not sure what kind of glue they used, but wasn't very great. So did that on both sides. Got the stonework or the masonry goop on the bottom. We'll clean that off when we stain it or sand it. Then on the top, I'm all about over-engineering stuff and thinking way too hard when I'm redoing things, but those 2 screws held this thing in place for over 20 years. The corbels weren't doing much. Those were more decorative, so I'm going to replace those. But when I reinstall this, the ledger board's in place. It's an oak ledger board, and I'm just going to use the same screws and screw it right back in and mix up a new batch of putty to cover the holes. So it's worked for 20 plus years, so I see no reason to change that. One of the other reasons I want to update this, why I said it needs an update, is oak. It's just clear coated, so oak over time just yellows and it just kind of looks old and aged and stuff. So my kitchen cabinets are the same way. They're just kind of the builder grade oak and they're just clear coated. So when I get to the kitchen, we'll do something fun with those too. But you see it's got some rings and stuff. I don't know if that's from a red candle like Christmas or whatever, but there's a few of those up here. So I need to probably do a little bit of extra sanding there to make sure I get the color out of there before I restain it. So I think we're ready to give this thing a good sanding. So I'm just going to use like 80 grit to get most of the goop off there. That's probably going to clog up the sandpaper pretty quick. And then I'll go to a nicer grit, 120 or 220 or something like that. I'm not going to go crazy on this because I am a little rustic industrial, so this doesn't have to be a fine piece of furniture, with 600 grit, kind of sandpaper. So. Okay, so I got all the sanding done. It went over with 80 grit, ran through a couple sanding discs of that. I'm pretty cheap, so I make my sanding disc last forever, but I think it kind of wears out your sander and your little cushion pad that the sander sits on. So don't be afraid to swap out your sanding discs or your sandpaper pretty often, especially if you're trying to take finish off because it gets gummed up and stuff. You probably saw me in the video. I have a rubber thing. I use it on my belt sanders and my other kind of sanders to get some of the goop out of there. So I use it here and there for the ground sanders and stuff, or the orbital sanders. So, but don't be afraid to swap out your discs and stuff. You'll get it done quicker. I think you'll be happier, so you won't have to work as hard. You won't wear out your equipment as fast. So I got to keep telling myself to do that. So 80 grit, and then I finished it up with 120 grit. Not going crazy, as I said. This is not a piece of fine furniture. It does have a couple dings and dents and stuff in it, so I'm just trying to do a color change and do a cosmetic, mini makeover for it. So got that all done, blew it off, tack clothed it off. If you want it to be nice and pretty, you're working, then yeah, do another 220 grit or 300 grit or 400 grit, whatever you want to do. Also, before you stain it or change a color, there's a pre-stain. It helps your stain lay down better and be more I guess monochromatic or less blotchy and stuff. As I mentioned earlier, I kind of like industrial, rustic kind of stuff. So if it has a little more character and changes in tones and stuff, I would actually prefer that. So I'm not going to do a pre-stain. I'm just going to put the color on it. So the color I decided on, it's something I use for some other projects. It's half classic gray and half weathered oak. And I think it's kind of cool. The gray kind of gets into the grain, kind of darkens it up, and then the weathered oak kind of gives it that lighter grayish look, like kind of like barnwood, but newer looking, but the same color. So that's what I'm going for. Mixed it in my little mug here, so be careful not to drink that if you're doing this in the morning. And I'm just putting it on with old t-shirts. Got a bunch of those, and those are cheap, and I just cut them up, and that's what I use a lot for my finish. So cover my hands so I don't end up with gray hands for a week. And we'll get going. A lot of people say go with wood grain and stuff, and you'll see me go cross grain and stuff. This is putting the finish on. So with the color in there and the gray, I like to push it into the grain
I feel going with it doesn't do a super good job, so I like to go cross grain like that just to get the color down into the wood. And then when I come back and stuff, I'll go with the grain to clear it up. And then top coats definitely with the grain and everything. Just trying to get color on this and soak it into the wood. The other thing, if you're mixing up a specialty color like I did, make sure you mix up plenty. You don't want to get halfway done and then you're hand mixing some other color and it may not match exactly. So I almost have half a cup here, and that's way more than I need for this little piece. So keep that in mind if you're mixing a specialty color. If you're just pulling it out of the can, just shake it in between, make sure everything's still mixed up. But specialty colors, make sure you mix enough for the job you're doing. Because even if you try to do half and half or whatever the recipe is, you know, depending on what your measuring method is, you may be off a little bit. Or if you didn't mix it as good the second time around, then the pigments may not have come up in the stain and stuff. I did that once and it was horribly noticeable to the point where, you know, I couldn't sell that, so. So I hope that picks up on the camera really well. We graded up quite a bit, but we'll really see. Maybe we'll do a comparison after it dries and stuff. I'll show you a piece of just kind of clear coated oak that's kind of old and yellow. So I think we're done. Let that soak in a bit longer. And we'll do a final wipe down and just let it dry. I'm just gonna let it dry overnight and I'll pick this up again tomorrow. So it's a weekend project, but I mean today I sanded for like 40 minutes, taking the thing down and putting it here like 20. I mean I'm into it like a couple hours. I mean sitting around and taking a drink break in between and stuff like that. So weekend project, but not a whole weekend project. You can get some stuff going and then let it, you know, sit and dry. All right, gonna let that dry, sit overnight, and get back to it tomorrow. Okay, so the letter finishes dry. I just suggest pay attention to whatever your finishes are that you're using. So the stain that I used, I needed a full 24 hours before I top coated it. And then also make sure that what you're using to finish your project are compatible. So I use Minwax in a lot of things, but some's water-based, some is oil-based kind of stuff. So just make sure that what you're top coating with is compatible with what you stained with. So in my instance, I needed a full 24 hours for this to dry, for this to adhere. If I try to do it sooner, so I felt this mid-afternoon yesterday, and it kind of had an oily consistency still, so I could tell it wasn't fully cured and soaked in there. So feels much better this morning. So it is morning. I'm going to throw a coat on here, so it's got a few hours to dry before I reinstall and start putting the corbels together and that kind of stuff. So want to knock that out this morning, so we can get this dry and so we can start working on the corbels and stuff. So. This stuff's interesting because it's almost like a thinned out Elmer's glue, so it goes on kind of opaque. It dries really well. I've used it on some other projects, and I like it quite a bit. And it's just one coat coverage, which is why I kind of want to use this one. Kind of the one and done concept, so that's always nice. Checking for dry spots. It's kind of thick, so that can happen with this one. So we've got good coverage. Gonna clean up some brushes and let this sit for a few hours before we can handle it, and we'll go from there.
Okay, so we've let the mantle top coat dry enough. I'm able to handle it, so I brought that in from the shop. Let's get that hung, and then we can measure for our corbels, because I'm going to use the original corbels, cut a little spacer off the back of it to get that bracket out a little bit, because it's so thin, inset would look a little bit funny, I think, and there's a little bit of a gap there at the bottom. So this one's nice and clean. This one, I don't know what's going on, but they must have put up their scratch coat first, and there's some metal lath in there. So for me to clean that out and make it look like this, I would have had to bring in a grinder and cut down the mesh and chip out that. I did chip a little bit of debris out of there, and I loosened up this stone. And to me, that's kind of one of the issues with these dry stack stone is you're basically just sticking it to the back. You don't have any grout in between to help adhere the block to the wall and stuff. So that one came loose, so I re-glued it back in with construction adhesive and let it sit overnight. So that's solid in there, and I just didn't want to make a mess of the house trying to clean that up. So I'm going to do the same thing that the original builders did, and just instead of like an inch block spacer, this is going to have to be like a 3/4 inch spacer or 1/2 inch spacer just to make up that depth. And remember, these corbels are just decorative. They're not really holding any of the weight. This ledger strip is. That's holding all the weight, and they're just decorative to hang there. So let's get this hung and then work on those. All right, well, it looks good. Let's make some spacers, see how they look, and then we'll paint up the spacers. We're gonna do it a flat black, so they just disappear in the shadow line behind here, and then put the bracket in the front. So I'm limited to how far out the bracket can come because I've got the face here. I'd like it to be a little bit shorter because I'd like to make this a little bit thicker. That one's gonna be like 3/4 inch spacer, this one 1/2 inch. So I'll cut them, fit them, see how it looks. If it does what it needs to, then that's what we'll go with. But let's do that.
Okay, so I made a few different spacers for the backs of those corbels. We'll see which ones work out the best, so whether it's the thinner ones or the thicker ones. So that should bring us those metal corbels out a little bit further so they're not sunken back and lost behind the rock. So we're gonna paint them up, let them dry, just using this Project Source stuff, so cheap, and it's flat black because shadows are not shiny. So flat black for this, hope you'll just disappear in the shadows. Give them a coat of paint, it dries really quick, so I love this stuff. Let's give it a shot. Okay, let those dry 10-15 minutes. This stuff dries pretty quick, so come back and look at it in a bit. And
Okay, so overall I think that went pretty good. Staining went well on this. Taking it apart went really well. So staining it went well. The delay of 24 hours before I could put the top coat on there, made it less of a weekend project and more stretched out. But as far as time into it, a few hours, honestly. So a couple hours the first day of stripping it down, staining it. You saw me, it took like 5 minutes to put a clear coat on it and you just let it wait. So I mean, you'd be watching a program or playing with the kids or doing whatever, and kind of, knock off a couple things here and there with this kind of project. So after I decided what I wanted to do with these, they went in pretty good. Little difficult to get to the bolts back there, so I have a specialty tool. It's a ratcheting. These happen to be Phillips head bolts, or Phillips head pan head screws. So a little hard to get to back there, so I have a ratcheting Phillips head. So I was able to get those tightened up. Saves your knuckles and stuff against the rocks and everything, but overall it looks pretty good. I'm gonna live with it, how these corbels look. If it bugs me over time, I'm gonna save the other spacers, pull it out, and then wrap the front and do that kind of thing. It's a little more welding, a little more paint, a little more time stuff. So in the spirit of making this a weekend project, something you could do on the cheap and something that you don't need a lot of tools for. You saw me a lot of hand tools, sanders, and table saw to cut down these little spacers. But that's really it, something you would typically have in your garage, if you're not welding and stuff. So that's why I want to keep it as a simple weekend project. So went back into place, reinstalled it just like it came out. These are purely decorative, so we'll see how they look over time. And then just got to find some putty or something to fill in these two little holes on the top. Other than that, we're all done. Hope you enjoyed watching me, hopefully not struggle too much, but enjoyed me working. It's something I enjoy too, watching other people work, so hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully it's an improvement over what was there. I hope so. I hate to waste some time, but I like it. So got rid of that yellowed oak and something a little more gray that matches my gray walls, and I think the rock a little bit better. And then the black accents with the black surround around the fireplace. So like it. If you do me a favor, if you enjoyed watching these videos, like, share, subscribe, mash all the buttons down below. That helps me. And then it's suddenly summer here, so I've got some dry spots. I'm going to go do some sprinkler work. So on to the next project.